You know that feeling when someone walks into your house uninvited and starts rearranging your furniture? Now imagine they bring 50 friends, set up yoga mats on your lawn, and tell you it's actually their property. That's exactly what happened to me last spring. Except the house was 300 acres of land my family had owned for 4 generations, and the uninvited guest was the president of the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association, a woman who wielded a clipboard like a weapon and believed paperwork could rewrite reality itself. By the time I was done with her, she was facing criminal fraud charges. Her HOA was completely dissolved, and 60 families were thanking me for destroying the organization she'd spent 15 years building. And the best part, I did it using her own bylaws, an electric fence that cost me $8,000, and the single most satisfying emergency vote I've ever witnessed. My name is Thomas Reed, and this is the story of how Karen Lawson tried to steal my ranch with forged documents and fake authority, and how I turned her own rules against her so completely that she lost everything while I didn't lose a single inch of land. If you've ever wanted to see a power-drunk HOA president get absolutely destroyed by the law, she thought she was above stick around. Because what happened next was better than any revenge I could have planned. It started on a Tuesday morning in March, when I opened my mailbox and found a letter that made my coffee taste like battery acid. I was 52 years old, living on the same ranch where I took my first steps, where I scattered my father's ashes under the cottonwood grove where 5 generations of my family had worked this land. 300 acres of pasture cattle and memories sitting right next to the Meadowbrook housing development that went up 15 years ago. We'd always gotten along fine with the neighbors until Karen Lawson became HOA president and decided that community integration meant erasing property lines that had existed since 1897. The letter had official HOA letterhead, professional language, and complete absolute insanity in every sentence. Notice of Land Reclassification and Community Integration Initiative, the first line read, "My ranch had been administratively reclassified as community land and would be integrated into Meadowbrook common areas for the benefit and enjoyment of all residents." There was bureaucratic nonsense about historical usage patterns and progressive neighborhood development. The final paragraph requested my cooperation during this transition period. I read it 3 times, then 4. Then I actually laughed out loud because it was so absurd I figured it had to be a clerical error or some kind of prank. I crumpled it up, tossed it in the trash, and went back to fixing a fence in the northern pasture. That was my first mistake, underestimating just how far someone will go when they've convinced themselves that authority comes from a title and a stack of fake documents. 3 days later, Karen Lawson showed up at my gate, and that's when I realized this wasn't a joke. This was war. I was in the barn when I heard a car horn blaring, not a polite tap, but an aggressive, sustained honk that sent my horses skittering in their stalls. By the time I walked outside, she was standing beside a silver Mercedes with her arms crossed, glaring at my locked gate like it had personally insulted her. "Mr. Reed," she shouted, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She was maybe 5'4", early 50s, with severely cut blonde hair and a power suit that screamed middle management on a mission. "I've been waiting for 7 minutes. This gate needs to remain open during community hours." I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked over slowly, trying to process what I was hearing. "Community hours?" I said. "Ma'am, this is private property. Has been for over a century." She pulled out a tablet and started swiping with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in her entire life. "According to the documents filed with the county last month, this land has been administratively annexed into the Meadowbrook Community Trust. The integration process begins today." She looked up at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I suggest you read the materials we sent. This will go much smoother with your cooperation." "I read your letter," I said, keeping my voice level even though heat was rising in my chest. "And I'm telling you, it's wrong. This is the Reed family ranch. It's been privately owned since 1897. You can't just reclassify someone's property because you feel like it." Karen's smile vanished like someone flipped a switch. She tapped something on her tablet, and I heard the distinctive click of a camera. She was taking photos of me, of the gate of my ranch beyond. "Mr. Read resistance to community integration initiatives reflects poorly on residents seeking to maintain positive relationships with the Meadowbrook Association. I would hate for this to become adversarial. The threat was barely veiled, and it hit me like cold water. This woman wasn't joking. She actually believed she had the authority to take my land. Lady, I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but you need to leave. Now... She tucked the tablet under her arm and walked back to her Mercedes with the kind of casual confidence that made my skin crawl. Before getting in, she turned and called out the community. Yoga group will be using the Eastern Meadow tomorrow morning at 7. Please ensure they have access. Then she drove off, leaving me standing there in a cloud of dust, wondering if I'd just imagined the entire insane conversation. I didn't sleep much that night. I dug through old file boxes until I found the original land deed, the property surveys, the tax records going back decades. Everything confirmed what I already knew. The ranch was mine-free and clear, no lions, no easements, no gray areas whatsoever. At dawn, I drove straight to the county recorder's office to prove this was all some kind of administrative mistake that could be cleared up with a simple phone call. That's where things went from strange to terrifying. The clerk, a tired-looking woman named Patricia, pulled up the records on her computer and immediately frowned. "Ah," she said, leaning closer to the screen. "There's a recent filing here. An annexation petition submitted by the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association 4 weeks ago." My stomach dropped like a stone. Annexation for my land. Patricia clicked through several screens, her frown deepening. Says here, the property owner consented to voluntary annexation for community development purposes. She turned the monitor toward me, and I felt the world tilt sideways. There was my name typed neatly on an official-looking form, and below it a signature that looked absolutely nothing like mine. "That's not my signature," I said, immediately, my voice coming out harder than I intended. Patricia leaned in close, studying the document. "Did you authorize anyone to sign on your behalf, power of attorney, anything like that?"
No.
"Nothing. I've never even heard of this until I got that letter last week." She printed out copies for me, her expression sympathetic. "You need to contact the county attorney's office right away. Fraudulent filings happen more than you'd think, especially with HOAs. Some of them get ambitious." Walking out of that office, I felt like I'd stepped into an alternate reality. This wasn't just a misunderstanding or some bureaucratic mix-up. Karen Lawson had actually forged documents and filed false paperwork with the county to try to steal my land. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. This woman had committed fraud, put it on official record, and then showed up at my gate expecting me to just roll over and accept it. But here's what Karen didn't know about me: I don't panic and I don't fight angry. I fight smart. My father taught me that lesson back in '94 when we were dealing with a crooked contractor who tried to put a line on the ranch. "Let them make all the noise they want," Tommy Dad had said while we sat on the porch going through paperwork. "You just build your case piece by piece, brick by brick, until they've got nowhere left to run and nothing left to say." So that's exactly what I did. I went home, called Curtis Freeman, a retired sheriff's deputy and old family friend who knew more about property law than most lawyers, and started building the case that would eventually destroy Karen Lawson's entire empire. Curtis came over that evening. He was 68 years old, built like a retired linebacker with steel gray hair and the kind of calm, authoritative presence that made you feel safer just having him in the room. I showed him everything: the HOA letter, the forged annexation documents from the county, all my property deeds and surveys. He let out a low whistle and shook his head. "Tom, this is fraud. Clear-cut black and white fraud. But here's the thing you need to understand: HOAs operate in a weird legal gray zone. They've got bylaws that can feel like actual laws, and people get intimidated by official-sounding language. Karen's betting that you'll fold before this ever gets to court. She's counting on you being too tired, too scared, or too confused to fight back." "I'm not folding," I said flatly. Curtis grinned the kind of grin that said he'd expected exactly that answer. "Didn't think so. But here's what you need to understand about how this is going to play out. She's going to escalate. She'll send people onto your property to establish community usage. She'll try to manufacture a history of public access. She'll document everything and build a narrative that your land has been historically available to the neighborhood. It's a classic land grab tactic: create the appearance of legitimacy, then dare you to be the bad guy who kicks out yoga moms and kids playing soccer. So how do I stop it? He pulled out a notepad and started writing. Documentation. You need cameras on every entry point. Keep a detailed log of every single trespass, times, dates, license plates, faces, everything. Don't engage physically, don't threaten anyone, just record it all. Let them dig their own hole while you build an airtight case that proves they knew exactly what they were doing. That night, I ordered 6 trail cameras with night vision and started a logbook. Curtis also suggested something else that would prove crucial later: get your property boundaries surveyed again. Make absolutely sure the markers are clear, documented, and irrefutable. And consider putting up new fencing with proper signage. If she's going to claim community access, make her explain why she's tearing down posted no trespassing signs on clearly marked private property. It was solid advice, but I had absolutely no idea just how bad things were about to get. The next morning, right at 7, I heard voices drifting across from the eastern pasture. I grabbed my camera and walked down there to find 12 people in yoga pants and tank tops rolling out mats on my land. Karen Lawson stood at the front with a portable speaker playing meditation music, looking for all the world like she owned the place. "Good morning, everyone," she called out in that bright, cheerful voice people use when they're pretending everything is normal. "Let's center ourselves in this beautiful shared space and begin with some deep breathing." I walked up slowly, camera already recording. "Excuse me. This is private property. You're all trespassing." Several people looked uncomfortable and stopped what they were doing, but Karen just smiled serenely like I was a mildly annoying insect. "Mr. Reed, we discussed this. The Eastern Meadow is now part of the Community Wellness Program. Please don't disrupt the class. Lady, you're standing on my land without permission. I'm calling the sheriff." Karen's smile didn't waver, but her voice took on a sharp edge. "I have documentation showing this area is available for community use. If you interfere with sanctioned HOA activities, I'll be forced to file a harassment complaint against you." I was so stunned by the sheer audacity that I actually laughed. "You're trespassing on my property, and you're threatening to file harassment charges against me." She didn't answer, just turned back to her yoga group. "Let's begin with sun salutations, everyone. Just ignore the disruption." I pulled out my phone and called the sheriff's office. A deputy named Rodriguez showed up 20 minutes later, listened to both sides of the story, and checked the property records on his laptop. "Ma'am," he said to Karen in that patient but firm tone, "cops use this land as privately owned by Mr. Reed. You and your group need to leave." Karen pulled out her tablet, pulling up the forged annexation documents with a flourish. "As you can see, Deputy, there are ongoing legal proceedings regarding land reclassification. Until that's resolved, the community maintains its historical access rights to this area." Rodriguez looked at me, his expression neutral, but his eyes showing he'd dealt with this kind of thing before. "Mr. Reed, has this been filed with the court?" "Yes, as fraud," I said. "That signature on those documents isn't mine. I've already reported it to the county attorney's office." The deputy sighed, and I could see him doing the mental calculation of how much paperwork this was going to generate. "This sounds like a civil matter that needs to be resolved through the courts. In the meantime, ma'am, I'm advising you and your group to leave this property." He didn't order them out, he advised them. That distinction would turn out to matter later. Karen gathered her yoga group and left, but not before announcing loudly to everyone within earshot, "We'll be back tomorrow. This is community land and we have every right to be here." Mr. Reed's intimidation tactics won't change that. She was true to her word. Over the next 2 weeks, my ranch became a siege zone. The yoga group came back 3 more times, each time with Karen leading them like some kind of trespassing Pied Piper. Then it was a community bird-watching club that set up observation stations along my fence line. Then a group of kids showed up in the western pasture with a soccer ball because Karen had told their parents it was a shared recreation area available for youth activities. I documented everything. Every face, every license plate, every time, every date. My logbook grew thick with entries. My trail cameras captured hundreds of images. And through it all, I stayed calm, stayed professional, and let them keep digging. Curtis came by regularly to review the evidence, and one evening he summed it up perfectly. She's trying to build a usage history. She wants to claim that your land has been facto community property for long enough to establish some kind of adverse possession or prescriptive easement claim. It's legal garbage, but she's counting on you either getting tired or making a mistake that she can use against you. I'm not getting tired, I said, but I need to stop this before someone actually gets hurt out here. I've got cattle, equipment, irrigation ditches, real hazards that these people are wandering into without any idea what they're doing. Curtis thought about it for a moment, then nodded slowly. What you need is a fence, not your old ranch fencing, something that makes a definitive statement, something that keeps people out without you having to physically intervene every single time. I've got fences all around the property. You've got old ranch fencing that people can duck under or climb over. I'm talking about something that creates an undeniable boundary and protects your liability at the same time. Because here's what's going to happen. Tom Karen's going to keep sending people onto your property, and eventually someone's going to get hurt. A kid's going to fall in a ditch, or someone's going to spook a horse, or any number of things. And when that happens, she's going to sue you for maintaining an attractive nuisance or failing to secure a community area. Guaranteed. That's when the idea crystallized in my mind. An electric fence, I said slowly. High visibility, properly marked, completely legal. Curtis's grin was wolfish. Now you're thinking like a strategist. Make it impossible for anyone to claim they didn't know it was private property. Make it their choice to violate clearly posted boundaries. Document every warning sign, every posted notice, everything. Let the fence do the work while you sit back and watch her paint herself into a corner. I spent the next week installing 3-strand electric fencing along the entire property line adjacent to Meadowbrook. It cost me $8,000, a hefty chunk of money, but it was worth every single penny for what it would accomplish. I put up bright yellow warning signs every 50 feet. HIGHVOLTHENCENCENOTRICISSINGPRISSIPIASSINGPRIEPEEPEE. The signs were impossible to miss, printed in bold black letters that you could read from 30 yards away. I documented the entire installation process with photos and video, including close-ups of every single warning sign, every fence post, every connection point. I filmed myself testing the fence with a voltage meter showing that it was set to the legal maximum enough to deliver a sharp, painful shock, but not enough to cause actual injury. Everything was by the book, everything was documented, everything was defensible. The fence went live on a Friday morning. I flipped the switch on the charger, and the fence began to hum a constant low buzz that vibrated through the wire like a living thing. It was the sound of boundaries being enforced. The sound of property rights being defended. The sound of Karen Lawson's plans about to hit a wall made of physics and law. She noticed immediately. Karen showed up at my gate that same afternoon, her face flushed red with fury, practically vibrating with rage. "You can't put up an electric fence along community property," she shouted before I'd even reached the gate. "I can put up whatever fencing I want on my private property," I said calmly, keeping my voice level and my body language relaxed. "It's completely legal. It's properly marked with warning signs every 50 feet, and it's necessary to keep trespassers out and protect people from wandering into hazards. This is a hostile act against the Meadowbrook community. This is me protecting my land and my liability from people who refuse to respect clearly posted boundaries." She jabbed a finger at me through the gate bars, her voice rising to a near shriek. "You're going to regret this, Mr. Reed. The HOA board will be discussing your belligerent behavior at our next meeting. We'll see what the community thinks about you threatening children with electrocution. "I'm not threatening anyone," I said, my voice still calm and measured. "The fence is clearly marked with warning signs. As long as people stay off my private property, which they're legally required to do anyway, there's zero danger to anyone." Karen turned on her heel and stalked back to her Mercedes, slamming the door hard enough that I heard it echo across the pasture. I watched her peel out in a spray of gravel, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction settling in my chest. Curtis had been right. Now the choice was entirely hers and entirely documented. If anyone got hurt, it would be because they deliberately ignored multiple warnings on clearly posted private property. The liability had shifted completely. For 3 glorious days, the trespassing stopped. The fence worked exactly as intended. I actually started to relax, thinking maybe Karen had finally realized she couldn't bully her way through basic property law and physics. I should have known better. I should have remembered that cornered, desperate people don't retreat, they double down. On the 4th day, Curtis called me, his voice tight with concern. "Tom, you need to check the Meadowbrook Community Facebook page right now. Karen just posted something and it's bad." I pulled it up on my phone and my blood pressure spiked as I read. The post, written by Karen in that saccharine sweet tone she used when she was being particularly manipulative, was titled "Community Picnic and Land Access Celebration." It announced that the Meadowbrook HOA would be hosting a unity picnic on the newly integrated Eastern Meadow this Saturday at noon. There would be food trucks, games for kids, live music, and this part made my jaw clench, a symbolic fence removal ceremony to promote neighborhood cooperation and community spirit. I read it twice, my hands tightening on the phone. She was planning to cut through my electric fence and bring dozens of people onto my land for a picnic. She was literally advertising organized mass trespassing and property destruction, painting it as some kind of community celebration. Curtis called back a minute later. "She's trying to force a confrontation. If you physically stop them, she'll claim assault and paint you as the aggressor. If you let them through, she'll claim you've implicitly accepted community access and undermined your own property rights." "So what do I do?" I asked, even though part of me already knew the answer. "Nothing," Curtis said firmly. "Let her do exactly what she's planning. Document everything from start to finish. Call the sheriff when they show up. Let the fence do its job. But Tom, and this is critical, make absolutely sure all those warning signs are still up and clearly visible. Walk the fence line, photograph every single sign, make it impossible for anyone to claim they didn't know about the electric fence. Because she's going to try to claim you set a trap, that you didn't properly warn people. You need ironclad proof that you did everything right." Saturday morning, I walked the entire fence line with my camera, filming every single warning sign in high definition. They were all there, all 47 of them, bright yellow and impossible to miss, even from a distance. I documented the fence voltage, the proper grounding, every technical specification. Then, I positioned myself on a small rise with a clear view of the Eastern Meadow and waited with my camera ready. At 11:45, they started arriving. Cars lined up along the road, families piling out with coolers, folding chairs, and picnic blankets. I counted at least 60 people, maybe more kids running around, adults laughing and chatting, completely oblivious to the fact that they were about to participate in organized crime. Karen stood at the front of the crowd with a megaphone in one hand and a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters in the other, looking like some kind of deranged revolutionary preparing to storm the Bastille. I pulled out my phone and called 911. "This is Thomas Reed at the Reed Family Ranch on Old Mill Road. I'm reporting a large group of people about to trespass on my property and deliberately damage my fence. They're being led by Karen Lawson from the Meadowbrook HOA, and she's announced her intention to cut through an electric fence that's clearly marked with warning signs. The dispatcher said she'd send deputies immediately." Through my binoculars, I watched Karen address her crowd, gesturing dramatically toward my fence and my land, working them up like a general rallying troops before battle. Several people had their phones out filming the whole thing. Perfect! Let them document their own crimes. At exactly noon, Karen walked up to the fence with her bolt cutters held high like a sword. She paused for effect, said something to the crowd that got laughs and cheers, and then positioned the bolt cutters on the bottom wire of my electric fence. The snap was audible even from where I stood 100 yards away. Karen jerked backward with a yelp that was half scream, half gasp, dropping the bolt cutters like they were on fire. The crowd went completely silent, the festive atmosphere evaporating in an instant. She stared at her hand, then at the fence, then back at her hand, her face cycling through confusion, shock, realization, and finally pure rage in the space of about 3 seconds. "It's electric," someone in the crowd shouted, stating the obvious. Karen grabbed the megaphone with her unshocked hand, her voice shaking with fury. "Everyone stay calm. This is a dangerous, illegal obstruction. We need to, ma'am, step away from the fence." Deputy Rodriguez had arrived with 2 other patrol units, approaching from the roadside, where they'd parked quietly. They'd been watching for at least a minute before announcing themselves. Rodriguez looked at the bolt cutters on the ground, at the cut wire still sparking faintly, at the bright yellow warning signs positioned every 50 feet along the fence line. "Ma'am, you just vandalized private property and received a shock from a clearly marked electric fence. I need you to put down the megaphone and step away from the fence line." Karen's face had gone pale, but her voice came out defiant. "Officer, this is a community action. We have every right to access this land." "Mr. Reed has illegally blocked, ma'am. We've been through this before," Rodriguez said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "This is private property. Those warning signs are clearly visible. You organized a group to trespass and damage property, and you did so after being previously advised by law enforcement that this land is not community property. I'm going to need everyone to clear this area immediately or citations will be issued." But Karen, in what I can only describe as a moment of spectacular self-destruction, couldn't let it go. "We're not leaving. This is our land. The HOA has proper documentation, then take it to court, like everyone else has to," Rodriguez said firmly, his hand moving toward his citation book. "Right now you're trespassing, you've committed vandalism, and you're refusing a lawful order to disperse. Everyone needs to leave before I start writing tickets." That's when the crowd turned. A young dad holding his daughter's hand spoke up, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. "Karen, you told us this was legal. You said the HOA had permission to use this land." Other voices joined in a rising chorus of realization and anger. "You said it was safe. You said the fence was being removed today with the owner's permission. You said this was a sanctioned community event. We were supposed to have a picnic, not commit crimes on camera." The crowd began to fragment like ice breaking up on a river. People backed away from the fence, got in their cars, drove off with embarrassed or angry expressions. Within 10 minutes, the road was clear, except for Karen, still standing beside the cut fence with her megaphone and her bolt cutters, her empire crumbling around her in real time. Rodriguez walked over to me while his partners dealt with Karen. "Mr. Reed, you're going to need to file a formal complaint for the property damage and trespassing. Based on what I've observed here today, you've done everything by the book, clear, signage, legal, fencing, proper documentation of boundaries. I'm going to cite Men's Lawson for criminal mischief and trespassing. I'd also recommend you consider filing for a restraining order." I watched Karen get into her Mercedes and drive away, her face a mask of barely controlled fury mixed with something that might have been fear. She'd just committed crimes in front of witnesses on camera with law enforcement present. But I knew this wasn't over. Wounded, cornered people do desperate things, and Karen Lawson's next move would be her most desperate yet. Curtis came by that evening. I showed him all the footage, Karen cutting the fence, the crowd watching the moment of the shock, Rodriguez issuing citations, the crowd dispersing in confusion and anger. He watched it twice, then shook his head with something like admiration. "She walked right into it," he said. "She documented her own crime, brought witnesses, and did it all in front of law enforcement. But Tom, I'm telling you right now, she's going to escalate one more time. People like Karen don't accept defeat. They double down. They lawyer up. They throw everything they have left at the wall and hope something sticks." He was absolutely right. 4 days later, I received a certified letter from a law firm in the city, one of those expensive outfits with a downtown address and partners' names that all sounded like old money. The Meadowbrook Homeowners Association was suing me for creating unsafe conditions on community-accessible land, interfering with legitimate community access rights, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and about 6 other claims that ranged from creative to completely fabricated. They were seeking $250,000 in damages, plus a court order forcing me to remove the electric fence and cease all harassment of community members exercising their lawful rights. I sat in my kitchen reading the lawsuit for the 3rd time, and something strange happened. Instead of feeling angry or worried or intimidated, I felt calm, almost peaceful, because Karen had just made the biggest mistake of her life. By suing me officially, she'd moved this from harassment and trespassing into formal legal proceedings where facts and evidence mattered, where forged signatures and fraudulent documents would be exposed under oath, where her entire house of cards would collapse under the weight of discovery and depositions. And I had evidence. Boxes and boxes of evidence. Photos, videos, police reports, county records, witness statements, trespass logs going back weeks. Every single piece is meticulously documented and time-stamped. I hired Margaret Sinclair, a property attorney in her 60s who'd spent 30 years handling land disputes and had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless when someone tried to pull a fast one. She came to the ranch, spent 4 hours going through my documentation, and by the end of it, she was actually smiling. "Mr. Reed," she said, closing the last folder, "this is the most comprehensively documented case of HOA overreach and fraud I've ever seen. Not only do we have an ironclad defense, we have grounds for a substantial countersuit. Fraud, harassment, trespassing, vandalism, intentional infliction of emotional distress, right back at them. It's all here documented and witnessed. So we sue them back." Margaret leaned back in her chair, a calculating look in her eyes. "We could, and we'd win. But I want to do something a bit more creative. Something that doesn't just win the case, but solves the problem permanently. I'm listening." She pulled out a copy of the Meadowbrook HOA Bylaws and started flipping through pages. Every HOA operates under a set of rules and regulations filed with the state. According to these bylaws, the HOA president serves at the pleasure of the board, and the board is elected by residents holding voting shares. Those voting shares are allocated based on property value within the community boundaries. Now, here's where it gets interesting. When Karen filed those fraudulent annexation papers claiming your land was part of their community, she inadvertently created a paper trail that puts your 300 acres within the boundaries of the Meadowbrook HO jurisdiction. I frowned, not following yet. "What are you saying?" Margaret's smile was absolutely predatory. "I'm saying that, according to the documents Karen herself filed, you are now technically a stakeholder in the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association, a very large stakeholder. In fact, based on acreage and assessed property value, you hold approximately 63% of the voting shares in the HOA. The realization hit me like lightning. You're telling me I control their HOA? Not yet. But you could. All you need to do is formally register as a stakeholder based on the annexation documents that Karen filed, then call for an emergency board meeting and a vote. And Mr. Reed, with 63% of the voting shares, you can pass any resolution you want, including a vote to dissolve the entire HOA. The beauty of it was so perfect, I almost laughed. Karen had tried to steal my land using paper and bureaucracy and manufactured authority. Now I could use that exact same paper and bureaucracy to dismantle everything she'd built. The weapon she'd forged to attack me would become the weapon that destroyed her. "Do it," I said. "Let's burn it all down." Over the next 6 weeks, Margaret worked legal magic. She filed motions exposing the forged signatures and fraudulent documents. She submitted my entire evidence file to the county attorney's office, which opened a formal criminal investigation into Karen's conduct. She got my countersuit filed and served. And most importantly, she registered me as a voting stakeholder in the Meadowbrook HOA based on the annexation papers that Karen herself had filed, then called for an emergency board meeting under the bylaws provisions for stakeholder intervention. Karen tried to block it. She filed motions, she hired lawyers. She argued that the annexation was invalid and therefore my stakeholder status was invalid. But here's the beautiful irony: if she admitted the annexation was fraudulent, she was admitting to fraud. If she claimed it was legitimate, then I was a legitimate stakeholder. She trapped herself in a logical paradox of her own creation. The emergency meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening at the Meadowbrook Community Center. I'd never set foot in the place before. It was a bland, generic space with folding chairs, fluorescent lights, and motivational posters about community spirit that felt deeply ironic given the circumstances. About 40 residents showed up, the ones who'd been paying attention to the drama, who'd seen their HOA president get cited for vandalism, who'd started asking uncomfortable questions about where their dues were going and why they were potentially liable for a massive lawsuit. Karen sat at the head table with 4 board members, all of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. She'd tried desperately to prevent this meeting from happening, but Margaret had outmaneuvered her at every single turn. The law was clear: a majority shareholder could call for a vote of no confidence and a full board review. Margaret stood up and addressed the room in a clear, professional voice that somehow still managed to sound like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Margaret Sinclair, and I represent Thomas Reed, owner of the 300-acre ranch adjacent to this community. We're here tonight because this HOA, under the leadership of Karen Lawson, has engaged in systematic fraud, harassment, and illegal activity against my client over the past 6 months." Karen tried to interrupt, but Margaret talked right over her. "Mr. Reed owns 300 acres of land that his family has owned since 1897. His property is private, has always been private, and was never legitimately annexed or integrated into Meadowbrook, despite Ms. Lawson's repeated claims to the contrary." She pulled out a thick folder and started laying out documents on the table. "Documentation has been provided to all board members showing that Ms. Lawson forged Mr. Reed's signature on county annexation paperwork. She organized multiple trespassing events with full knowledge that she was violating property law. She incited property destruction. She filed a frivolous lawsuit using HOA funds without proper board authorization. And throughout all of this, she exposed every single dues-paying member of this association to civil and potentially criminal liability." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Several board members had gone pale. A woman named Diane, who served as board secretary, raised her hand with a trembling voice. "Are you saying Karen did all of this without board approval, without votes according to the financial records we've subpoenaed?" "Yes," Margaret said. "She used HOA funds to hire lawyers, file documents, and pursue legal action without proper authorization. And under the principle of joint and several liability, every member of this HOA can be held personally responsible for damages resulting from actions taken in the HOA's name." That's when the room exploded. People started shouting questions, their voices overlapping in panic. "How much liability are we talking about? Can they take our houses? I never agreed to any of this. I just wanted my street cleaned. This is insane." Margaret waited for the noise to die down, then continued in that same calm, measured tone. "Which is why Mr. Reed is offering an alternative solution. He's proposing a complete dissolution of the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association. Every member would be released from all HOA obligations, dues, and liabilities. The community would revert to standard county jurisdiction. No more fees, no more bylaws, no more board meetings, no more exposure to lawsuits from Karen's actions. In exchange, Mr. Reed will waive his right to pursue damages for the harassment, trespassing, fraud, and property destruction that occurred under Ms. Lawson's direction." The silence that followed was profound. I could actually see people doing math in their heads, weighing their options, calculating the value of freedom versus the cost of loyalty to a system that had just been exposed as corrupt and dangerous. A man in the back stood up, his voice shaking slightly. I vote yes. I'm done. I'm tired of paying dues for a board that's been completely out of control. If dissolving means we're free of this mess I'm in. Another voice from the side, I second that motion. Wait. Karen's voice cracked through the room like a whip. She was standing now, both hands gripping the table, her face flushed and her eyes wild. You can't just dissolve the HOA. This community needs structure. It needs leadership. It needs to not be sued into bankruptcy by a president who committed fraud and documented it on Facebook. Someone called out and nervous laughter rippled through the room. Everything I did was for this community. Karen shouted, her voice rising to a near shriek. I was protecting our property values, our way of life. You can't just throw that away because one selfish rancher wouldn't cooperate with integration. You forged his signature, Diane said quietly from the board table. Karen, you forged legal documents. That's a crime. The vote was called 33 in favor of dissolution, 7 against Karen and 6 loyalists who still believed in her vision or were too stubborn to admit they'd been wrong. The Meadowbrook Homeowners Association, which had ruled that neighborhood with an iron fist for 15 years, ceased to exist in under 2 hours. Karen left without another word, her face a mask of shock and rage, and something that might have been the first dawning of real consequences. I watched her walk out into the parking lot alone, her clipboard tucked under her arm, her empire reduced to ashes. The formal dissolution took another month of paperwork, legal filings, and bureaucratic processes. The county attorney's office moved forward with criminal charges against Karen. She eventually pled guilty to filing false documents and was sentenced to probation, community service, and fines totaling $18,000. Her lawsuit against me was dismissed with prejudice, meaning she could never refile it. The judge's written opinion included a paragraph about vexatious litigation that Margaret said was basically judicial code for stop wasting everyone's time with garbage lawsuits. The residents of the former Meadowbrook HOA sent me a card signed by dozens of people. Some of the messages were joking, thanks for the liberation, and finally free, but some were genuinely heartfelt. You saved us from years more of this nightmare. We should have stood up to her years ago. Thank you for having the courage to fight back. Curtis came by the ranch the day after everything was finalized. We stood by the eastern fence, the one Karen had cut, and watched the sun set over the pasture. The fence still hummed its quiet, steady rhythm, that low buzz that I'd come to associate with boundaries being respected and justice being served. You did good, Tom Curtis said, taking a sip of the beer I'd handed him. You could have fought her with your fists or your temper or by being just as nasty as she was. But you fought her with patience and paperwork and by letting her hang herself with her own rope. That's the smart way. That's the way that actually wins. I nodded, watching my cattle graze peacefully in the distance. She thought she could take what wasn't hers, just by filling out forms and making enough noise and convincing people that authority comes from a title. But land doesn't care about paperwork. Boundaries don't care about bylaws. Physics doesn't negotiate. Reality always wins eventually. You just have to be patient enough to let it happen. Curtis grinned and raised his beer. Physics trumps bureaucracy. You should put that on a sign. 2 weeks later, I did exactly that. Right next to the electric fence warning signs, I installed a small metal plaque with letters engraved deep enough to last generations. Private property, Reed family ranchest. 1897, and below that in slightly smaller letters, boundaries maintained by physics and law. The fence still hums. My cattle still graze. My daughter visits on weekends now and brings her kids, my grandkids, to run through the same cottonwood grove where she learned to walk, where my father scattered his father's ashes, where 5 generations of our family have lived and worked and protected this land. The acres that Karen Lawson tried to steal with forged signatures and manufactured authority and sheer stubborn audacity remain exactly where they've always been in the Reed family, protected by clear boundaries and the simple truth that you can't bureaucracy your way through a property line. Sometimes late at night when I'm walking the fence line, checking posts and wire, I think about Karen. I wonder if she learned anything from what happened, or if she's out there somewhere trying the same tricks on someone else who might not have the resources or the stubbornness or the sheer spite to fight back the way I did. But mostly, I don't think about her at all. She was a storm that passed through, loud and destructive and dramatic, but ultimately temporary. The land remains. The fence remains. The boundaries remain. And every time I hear that low, steady hum along the property line, I'm reminded that the best defense against chaos and theft and people who think rules don't apply to them isn't anger or aggression or matching their energy. It's clarity. It's documentation. It's knowing your rights and defending your boundaries and being willing to let people face the consequences of their own choices. She said it was community land. She brought bolt cutters and 60 witnesses to prove it. Physics disagreed. The law disagreed. Reality disagreed. And in the end, reality won.